Hey everyone and welcome back to another video. In this video we are going to talk about how closures work in JavaScript, and I did it on my live stream. So if you want to join the live stream, you can see the link in the description as well. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, please do it as it really helps the channel grow. Now without further ado, let's get started. Cool. So let's talk about closures. What are closures? So first of all, let's see the logical definition, and then we are going to see an example that makes sense. For example, it says a closure is the combination of a function enclosed with referencing to its surrounding state, its lexical environment. So let's see this and understand this in a better context. A closure is something like a box. So imagine it like this. If I have a function, let's call this function my function, and this has a value called counter. So let's say we say, or let's say my name. We're gonna take the name of Muhammad Junaid Khan. So let's say const the best person, and then we have Muhammad Junaid Khan. Okay, so we got Muhammad Junaid Khan in a variable called the best person. If I do console.log the best person, and then I log this and call this function, my function, just like this, then what happens? So understand this point. When JavaScript goes through all of this, this is what happens. It comes to line number 14 and it declares this function, which means that it just puts it out there. It doesn't do anything. No line or inside this function is executed. Then after line 14, it comes to line 19 and then it calls this function. That is when the interpreter or the compiler goes inside and first goes to line 15, executes it, and then goes to line 16 and then executes it. So if I run this right now, let's see what happens. You see the value Muhammad Junaid Khan. We could also make this better. We could say something like I am logging, and here is space, and then we got this value. Okay, so if I run this now, this is what we get. I'm logging Muhammad Junaid Khan. Okay, this makes sense. Now the thing is that after this function execution is finished, which means that the compiler or interpreter came inside here, executed this function, came here, executed this line and this line. After this line, this function body is finished. And now this variable, the best person, does not exist anymore, which means that if after this line I go and try to say console.log the best person, I will essentially get this. You can see the best person is not defined because the value there is finished. Does that make sense? Now, what is a closure? A closure is a function that has a reference to another variable outside of it, this block. So if this variable was not declared here, but rather it was declared here, then we would call it a closure. Does that make sense? Because this function closes around this variable. If I try to log the best person after this, this will actually work for us. If I log this, you will see that now you can see both of those values. So closure is a function which has variables being used inside, but those variables exist outside of its scope. Now, where do we use this? So I'm going to give you a really simple example. Let's say I got the opportunity by my HR team or my human resource team, and they said that, hey, I give you the right to have a function in which you can pass your salary and return anything from it. So what I do? I basically double my salary. That's what I do. I basically double my salary. So I'm going to create a function which doubles my salary whenever I pass it. So how do we make sure that that happens? Let's talk about this. So I'm going to first create a function, and here I'm going to say multiply or multiple of. And then this is going to be a function, okay? And in this function, I'm going to pass how many times I want to multiply it. Let's say I say something like here, multiple, okay? So here we got multiple of. So we got a multiple here. What I want to do is this. I could say something like, or we could say create multiplier, okay? And then here I would say function, or let's say something like return function. And here we'll get a value. And then here we just would say return value. And now it's going to go above your head. So bear with me. I'm going to kind of comment all of this. And what I want to do is that I want to create a multiplier of 2, which means I'll say const 2x or 2x multiplier, and here I say create multiplier of 2, and then I can say console.log my salary is, and here I can now call this 2x multiplier with a value, and I call it, let's say 10,000. Okay, so let's say 10,000. Now if I log this, let's see what comes out. So if I run this, you will see that we got 20,000. How did we get 20,000 out of this? Anyone knows? So let me tell you what's happening. When JavaScript comes here, we create a multiplier. We create a multiplier that says, hey, how many times would I multiply any value with? So what happens is that when we call this function, create multiplier, JavaScript comes here, it gets the multiplier and it returns a function. That's why here we can call it again. So in general, I think with the styled whatever case was, let me do this one by one. First of all, let's do this. I'm going to console.log create multiplier. And this is a function. Ooh, I have a typo. If I run this, let's see what happens. It's a function called create multiplier. What happens if I call this function? If I call this function, I will still see another function, which is this function. So what happens is that when I call this function the first time, it comes inside and it returns back this function. In the next line, I can call this function again. So I can call this 2 times. You might have seen this syntax multiple times. When we do this, that actually means that first time when we call this function with this highlighted syntax, we get back another function. And in that second function, we call it like this. So if I wanted to log this one in a single call, I would say something like create multiplier. And here I could say 2. And then the value that I want to say is 10,000. If I do this, you will see the exact output 20,000. Now, if we get back to the closure concept, what a closure is that once we call this function on line number 12, which is this, what happens is that it goes inside with this value 2. It goes inside with this multiply or multiple variable inside, and it returns back this function. Now this function's execution is finished, but when I call this with 10,000, I'm not passing the 2 or anything now. How does it return 20,000 then? That is because this function is a closure. This function has the reference of this multiple variable even though the execution has finished. So when we call this line, this function execution happens completely and then it finishes. But since this function is already accessing this multiple, this value we pass it. We pass the 10,000. But this 2 that we have, we called this on the line above. When we pass this value comes in as the value 2. And then this function knows that, hey, whatever value I'm going to pass, it's going to multiply with 2. That is why this function is a closure. So I hope this makes sense. Closure is basically used for things like this. Now that I have this 2x multiplier, I don't have to write this command anytime. So I can quickly go ahead and make like 3 copies or 4 copies of this, pass 4 here, 5 here, 6 here, and 7 here. It doesn't matter what value I'm passing. Let's say I'm passing 150 here. Then what happens is that even though I'm just passing the value, it automatically multiplies it because it's a 2 times multiplier, because this multiple is already there in access to this function, if I'm making sense. So if I run this, you see all the values multiplied by 2. I hope that makes sense. Junaid says the 2x multiplier now is a function at line 20. Line 21, we invoke the function by providing value to the argument. Yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. But here, the closure, exactly. A closure is a function which has reference to a variable outside of its scope. That is the definition. So in this case, this create multiplier function, that is not the closure. This function, which has access to the multiple variable, that is the closure. Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how much did you actually understand the concept of closure? So I hope you liked the video. If you did, press the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel if you have not already, and also let me know in the comments if you want me to cover a particular topic about JavaScript. As always, happy coding. I'm going to see you in the next one.